Well, this is nice, Caitlin. You're actually here.
Yes, always a pleasure to be here in person when we have the chance, and today in matching sweaters nonetheless. Who would have thought? Welcome back.
Yeah, it's our first episode of 2025. How is it 2025 already, Caitlin?
It beats me. Wasn't this meant to be a time where pills were potentially replacing meals and entire feasts were squashed into a single cube? I mean, the Jetsons and Willy Wonka, to be fair, really set some high expectations, didn't they?
Yeah, well, I have no intention of sitting down to a plate of pills for dinner. And luckily for this podcast, people still crave, don't they? The sensory experience of food, flavors, textures, aromas. You know, maybe this was underestimated back then.
Exactly. But there were predictions back in the 70s of lab-made meals. The thought was that we'd be running out of natural resources, so we'd be growing everything in vats.
Yeah, and to be fair, this prediction, and I guess it relates to sustainability, doesn't it? Wasn't entirely wrong. They nailed the idea that technology would influence our food systems because, you know, we now have industries such as precision fermentation. We've got non-animal dairy coming through, and we're seeing cell-cultured meat gaining regulatory approval around the world. But did anyone predict that humanity would develop a pill that actually made us eat less?
Well, as far back as the 1980s, right, obesity was being recognized as a growing public health challenge. But most predictions lean toward more mechanical solutions like body implants or surgeries rather than hormone-based drugs.
Nonetheless, it does feel like we have some sort of magic bullet here. So the rise in GLP-1 drugs such as Ozempic are definitely taking hold, and it's going to present opportunities for product innovation because consumers' preferences are changing and pretty rapidly.
Yes. We already hear stories from people saying how surprised they are at how little they eat and the impact this is having on what they actually choose to buy. Now, we should clarify that Ozempic is a brand name of GLP-1 drugs on the market. There are others, and these include Wegovy and Saxenda, and all were originally developed to tackle type 2 diabetes. However, their ability to suppress appetite is rapidly becoming the main event.
So in today's episode, we're going to explore the potential impacts of Ozempic, including on the food and beverage sectors, and we're bringing together a range of experts from food science, behavioral science, sensory science, and of course, the food industry.
And suffice to say, there are already some clear signs of impact.
Yeah.
We have a story here from Confectionery News that says that GLP-1 drugs are already affecting Hershey's sales, albeit mildly. During an earnings call in November 2024, the company's CEO said that GLP-1 will have an impact on confectionery sales and that the company is evolving in a way to make sure we have the right offerings for those consumers as well.
It is a powerful example, I think, and an early one. And I think, you know, snacks and confectionery are likely to be the most at-risk sectors.
And if you're the main shopper for your household and you're taking GLP-1 medication, it's not a big leap to suggest that this will impact how much food this shopper puts in the basket for other members of the family as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're shopping and you're hungry, you put more in the basket, don't you? It's an interesting thought, and it does point to some of the wider consequences around here.
So stay tuned for our discussion later on in this episode, and later we'll check in with Shania at the Together Agency to get a grip on how TikTok is shaping the narratives that might just impact the products we will be buying or not buying across 2025.
Yeah, always illuminating for anyone the wrong side of 27. Now, Caitlin, what are you preparing for tonight's dinner?
No clue, but it won't be a pill or an injection. Most likely, I'll have to magically assemble whatever remains in my refrigerator.
Yeah, well, don't ever invite me to supper, Caitlin. But no matter, because with so many trends in play, from technology to discovery, we thought it was about time we thought about meal planning and how that is evolving around the world. It's a huge topic and it's on the move. So we brought back Millie Diamond from consumer forecasting agency WGSN because she's written a report all about meal prep. Now, tell us, Millie, what's the report about? How did you go about compiling it?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously meal prep's been around for a long time. It's nothing new. We've seen the rise of meal prep kits over the last 10 years sort of absolutely explode. But meal prep really speaks to so many different consumer needs. So you've got time-saving solutions. You've got the cost aspect of things. You know, preparing meals in bulk helps people manage their food budgets better. Then you've got the health side of things. People want to prep to control portion size, track their nutritional intake.
Yeah. And you picked up there on the value side of things. We often forget, don't we, in the food industry, always talking about innovation, that there are many people that are still struggling to create meals that are within their budget. So absolutely hear you there. Can you give us a flavour of some of the growth spaces you identified in the report?
I think one of the ones that I was most excited about when I started writing this was kind of flavor boosters. So as we know, there's a big push at the moment. Consumers want to try more global cuisines and flavors, and they're being influenced from everywhere and anywhere. But it's quite a big commitment to say, right, I'm going to pick this dish from this country and I'm going to make it. That's a lot of different ingredients to buy. And if you don't like it, you're a bit stuck. Whereas with flavor boosters, as we've called it, you could have your regular burger, say, but you might add on a new spicy ketchup, which has got a different chili variety on. And it really adds and gives you a whole new meal experience, which you wouldn't otherwise have. So we were really looking at things like condiments that you can just add into your meals that will add that new element. And I was in New York a couple of months ago. I went to Pop-Up Grocer, which always has amazing new products. And I saw Devious Foods had this seasoning, which is a protein seasoning in different flavors. So they had one which was herby jalapeno. That allows you to not only add a seasoning flavor to your dish, but also gives you 10 grams of protein per serving. So it's really hitting on the flavor side of things, but also helping people meet their nutritional needs.
Yeah, I can't quite rival your trip to New York, but my local co-op, when I was in there last week, they have a whole bay now of condiments. And it says to me that at a ground level now, there is an expectation that cooks are becoming more experimental and they are looking to boost up that flavor.
Definitely. I think, it really kicked off in the pandemic with people experimenting more at home because they didn't have the choice. And that's just absolutely snowballed now. We're seeing the rise of more regional Latin American cuisines, more Southeast Asian cuisines. So we've seen things like the Yuzu Co., who have a yuzu flavor booster. They just launched a sudachi one, which is a citrus fruit, which a lot of us aren't familiar with in the West. And that's just adding, a new dimension to dressings and marinades with a different citrus flavor to what we might normally be used to. So I think it's a really exciting way for people to elevate their meals.
Yeah, and discover something new in an accessible way. Is there stuff around health?
Definitely. I mean, health is a big one. People are getting a lot more conscious about what they're eating. And if you go onto TikTok or Instagram, you're going to see people prepping for health reasons. And people really want kind of the benefits of cooking from scratch, but without the hassle. So people are utilizing their freezers more. They're utilizing their slow cookers. So it's a bit of a challenge for product manufacturers. They've got to create something that's healthful, but that also fits into consumer meal plans. So I love Bibigo. I don't know if you've seen this brand. You can get it in the UK.
No.
But in Vietnam, they have a product called Healthy Mandu. So they're like dumplings, but they've made them healthier again. And those kind of things are great because you could put them in a soup, or you could have them grilled, or you could throw them in your air fryer and have them as part of a salad. And it's those kind of things that are really giving the benefit to the consumer, that they can just pull out of the freezer and they can incorporate it into a range of different meals.
As you may know, we've been trying to wrap our heads around the whole GLP-1 dynamic, the Ozempic era, shall we say. Is this something that you've picked up in your report in terms of meal preparation and the impacts on meal preparation?
Yeah, definitely. So we did a GLP-1 forecast a few months back. The way that they're eating is shifting completely. So they're having smaller portions. They might be having to eat a little bit more frequently because they're having those smaller portions. But they're also focusing heavily on their nutrition, which they might not have been doing previously. So they're really having to rethink their whole meal prep structure. So we've seen protein as the big one. So if you go onto TikTok, Instagram, you're going to see protein being pushed heavily because people really want to ensure that they're not going to lose any muscle mass too, which is one of the side effects of these GLP-1 agonists. So protein is being very heavily prioritized. It also has the benefit of keeping consumers fuller for longer. Fiber as well is something that consumers are heavily prioritizing, obviously for the digestive benefits. And we've seen things like Nestle. They launched their Vital Pursuit meal companions a few months back.
Yes.
And then you see things such as Smoothie King in the US. So they just launched a range of smoothies which help with the side effects of GLP-1 agonists, including digestive issues, fatigue. And so it's really nice to see these products coming out, which actually help support consumers. And, it's quite a big journey for a lot of people to go on. So anything that feels like it's helping them is going to offer that extra level of support to consumers.
And of course, with smaller portions, becomes a reduction in perhaps the pleasure of food.
We've also just done a forecast on stimulating textures, which I have to say was the most fun report I've written this year. This is just innovating with texture to deliver products with heightened sensory appeal.
Yeah.
So texture plays such a crucial role in influencing a consumer preference for a product.
It does, isn't it? Because people often say, I love it because it was crunchy, it was creamy. They think they're talking about the taste of something. It's actually the texture that they're referring to, isn't it?
Definitely. And texture is just as important as flavor in shaping a satisfying experience. So in our forecast, we've looked at a range of different textures. As you said, there's crunchy, there's crispy, there's chewy, there's creamy. One that I think is really fun, which a lot of us in the West, again, haven't really heard of, is Q texture, which is inspired by the QA desserts, which are popular in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. And this is kind of like a bouncy, chewy kind of texture. So if you think of al dente pasta, it's got that kind of rubbery bounce. And I think we're really going to start to see that rise globally. People are making croissants with rice paper. So the rice paper that you would normally have with summer rolls, which again has that kind of chewy, stretchy resistance, they're layering them up and then baking them. So on the outside, you get this crispy, crunchy, crackly, golden, delicious thing. And then in the middle, you're getting the chewy layers of the rice paper.
Really interesting. And the collision of two dynamics, the rise of Ozempic, creating this demand for more sensorial pleasure from smaller portions. And your report on stimulating textures really providing some of the answers there, some of the pathways for manufacturers. Really interesting to hear from you, Millie. And I hope we'll hear from you again. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And now for our main event. There's no turning back now. Space age or not, semaglutides or GLP-1 medications have landed. Almost 75% of Americans have heard something about brand names involved. Ozempic, Wegovy, and so on, according to the Pew Center. With human willpower proving inadequate against the war on obesity, have we finally found the magic bullet? According to YouGov, 38% of Americans say that they would take GLP-1 drugs if prescribed by their doctor.
Yeah, it's a huge moment, isn't it, Caitlin? Likely to have all kinds of ramifications for manufacturers and society at large. Put simply, these drugs mean millions of people are going to be consuming less, eating less. So as the Ozempic era gets underway, we've assembled some experts to help us explore some of the likely implications. Later, we're going to hear from Nikki Clark. She's founder of Renourished Soup Company, and she's going to be speaking about how perhaps the food industry should be adapting. But first, we have Faris Zurakat, who's assistant professor of nutritional medicine at Columbia University, New York City. Now, he studies the factors that drive behaviors and is interested in understanding how these medications affect food choice and intake, particularly in real-world settings. Next, we have Paulina Lang, who is head of behavioral science at the MMR Group. Paulina works extensively to apply behavioral theories and frameworks to untangle the challenges of the day. And we have also Fiala Mehring, who is a friend of this podcast and sensory experience director at MMR. I mean, let's start by reminding ourselves what these drugs actually do. Faris, tell us.
Yeah. All of these medications, you've probably heard Ozempic, Wegovy, tirzepatide, they're all similar in that they have this GLP-1 backbone, a hormone that is produced naturally in our body, and it's involved in inhibiting food intake. But really, GLP-1's primary action in the body is to improve blood sugar. In the presence of glucose, or once we've eaten a food that has carbohydrate, it's actually helping the pancreas secrete insulin so that we can get the glucose into those cells. And indeed, that's where these medications were born from, is actually for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And it was sort of a serendipitous finding that these individuals who had type 2 diabetes often had the comorbidity of obesity. They were being treated with these GLP-1 receptor agonists, again, to improve blood sugar control. Many of them were losing weight and anecdotally reporting suppression of appetite or increased satiety. And I think that's really what has now stimulated this really boom of research into using these GLP-1 receptor agonist-based medications specifically for the treatment of obesity.
And do we know whether the impact of these drugs is purely physical? I'm thinking here about the suppression of appetite, or is there something else at work here?
I think, in fact, it's probably more neurological than it is physical. So obviously we hear a lot of reports and there's a lot of data showing a large proportion of individuals being treated with these medications experience gastrointestinal discomfort, particularly nausea, which would lead people to postulate that these are really more physical effects. And indeed, nausea is a part of satiety. It's a part of the satiety cascade. And that's probably one mechanism by which they are reducing food intake. But interestingly, these drugs, the GLP-1 receptor agonists, are really acting on reward regions of the brain, right? They have very well-defined neural circuitry to really enhance satiety and suppress appetite and potentially even shift the desirability of certain foods. Even there's some data showing that the nausea that people are feeling is emanating from the brain, right? It seems to be really acting on the brain and the central nervous system primarily.
So it's interfering with the hedonic triggers of appeal of food from a perceptive standpoint. So anecdotally, I've read about people who used to drink alcohol regularly, but now when they even see a glass of wine might feel a slight degree of revulsion. Again, anecdotally, but we are at the beginning of this journey. Is there any evidence as to why that might be the case?
Yeah, it's a good question. Scientists are really still trying to untangle the mechanisms here. As we said, there's good evidence to suggest that it is based on the effects of GLP-1, particularly in the hindbrain and in these areas of the brain that are involved in sort of motivated behavior and reward seeking. We do see what you're saying anecdotally. We do see that in the data within humans around foods, though. It does appear to be shifting to a degree the types of foods that people are finding desirable, that people like and are craving, for example. So studies in clinical trials in humans that were conducted in the laboratory where they're actually measuring food intake among these individuals that are being treated with GLP-1 receptor agonists. They're able to really precisely quantify not just their total intake, but the types of foods that they're selecting to consume, is showing that indeed people are eating quite a lot less, about 25% reduction in daily caloric intake. But that seems to be driven predominantly by a reduction in consumption of sort of higher fat foods. It doesn't seem to be affecting intake of the sweet foods so much, but high fat foods, high fat non-sweet foods, in particular, intake of those is being reduced. And that actually really closely mirrors what's seen in animal models as well, where it seems to be a preferential reduction in the liking or at least the eating of higher fat foods.
Is the world ready for this? I've read recently that Nestle believe that perhaps this is going faster than the industry can catch up, that professionals in the industry can get their heads around. What is it that you think we need to be ready for?
Yeah, it's an important question, and things are moving quickly, and more people are being treated with these medications and are seeking these medications. I think it's going to shift the landscape of sort of the healthcare industry, but also the food and beverage industry, and there will have to be adjustments. From a nutrition and health perspective, I think the key thing that we're thinking about is making sure that people are adequately nourished. So again, thinking less about calorie intake, right? These are individuals with obesity who have excess adiposity and excess energy stores. So we like to see that reduction in total energy intake. But are they achieving nutritional adequacy? Are they consuming enough of the vitamins and minerals and micronutrients that are really key and in a lot of physiological processes. And a really good point about fat-soluble vitamins. These are vitamins that have key roles in the body. And if individuals are suppressing their fat intake, is that going to affect the absorption of these vitamins? And so, I like to liken this to bariatric surgery, where there's a lot of nutritional counseling involved pre and post treatment with bariatric surgery. And I think we need to be thinking more about that with these GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs, making sure that people are achieving nutritional adequacy in the context of reduced food intake.
As the GLP-1 market grows, we have a demand for more targeted food. So we see this in terms of portion-controlled meals, like the ones that have been recently released by Nestle's Vital Pursuit range, which are frozen meals that are also high in fiber and protein. So Nestle markets them as protein-aligned. What are your thoughts on this, Ferris?
Yeah. So protein's a big one, right? I think there's a big concern about, muscle loss, lean mass loss. Anytime you lose weight, you are losing both fat and lean mass, right? And there's no evidence to suggest that with GLP-1 receptor agonists, you lose more proportionally lean mass than you would with specifically diet and physical activity. But you are losing a lot of weight, and so you are losing a lot of lean mass as well. And so there is a big concern about making sure that individuals are getting adequate amounts of protein to try to limit that lean mass loss to the degree that they can. Fiber is another one that's come up a lot. These drugs tend to delay gastric emptying, and so there's some thinking that certain types of fiber can increase transit time, and maybe that will mitigate some of the adverse gastrointestinal symptoms that are experienced. The manufacturers of these foods would be, I think, wise to try to use the information on what is happening, what people are experiencing, and try to leverage that to manufacture products that will be better received by these individuals. So one area that I think is really potentially important is reducing portion and package size, right? We've heard a lot about how large portions have, to a degree, fueled the obesity epidemic, particularly here in the United States. And there's a degree of demand there, right? People want more for their money's worth. But in this case, with people being treated with GLP-1 receptor agonists, they don't need as large of meals, right? They don't want as large of meals. They're feeling sated with small amounts of food. And so can this be an opportunity to really promote consumption of smaller food portions, nutrient-dense portions, and maybe just eating more frequently like you might see with something like post-bariatric surgery? I think there's a real market here where, we can actually in some ways promote the desire and the demand for smaller food portions, which could be great.
And is it not just nutritionally dense, but also nutritionally diverse products? If people are eating smaller portions, there needs to be a greater diversity compacted into a smaller portion.
Absolutely. And this is also where eating more frequently, smaller portions more frequently, could also play in, so that you can introduce more variety throughout the day rather than in a single meal, for instance.
So interestingly, as Andy mentioned earlier, there's evidence that people who used to crave a glass of wine no longer feel that way, though. So is there any evidence around the reasoning for some of these vices? And we can kind of consider this a more positive effect in this case for some people.
Yeah, no, I do think that it's positive. And again, the mechanisms are not fully untangled, but it's worth noting that sort of the GLP-1 receptor agonists do act on the dopaminergic system. So we think about dopamine as this sort of pleasure-promoting hormone. And, certainly GLP-1 binding to its receptors in the brain has downstream effects on dopamine signaling and GABA signaling. And so this could help to explain why we see some of that reduced motivation or drive for foods and beverages like alcohol that are typically providing a really rewarding response. Again, this speaks to the central actions of these medications, and this could be really positive things. We see reduced cravings for high fat, high sugar foods, for instance. We see data demonstrating that alcohol intake is reduced while individuals are using these medications. And I do think that this presents a really nice opportunity to improve these behaviors and build healthful patterns, if you will, and to really kind of build an education around this. in hopes of sustaining, right, these favorable behavior changes, maybe even after the cessation of treatment. So certainly I do see this as a window of opportunity, and it's an opportunity that's made possible by the really central effects of these GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Now, Fiala, I'd love to bring you in here because you've been considering the impacts of Ozempic and GLP-1 medications on product experience across food and beverage.
Yeah, I have. And I think, we're all talking about this being very early days and how we're standing on the edge of something that is very, very complex. And I think one of the sort of implications that I've been thinking a little bit about is on product experience. And if you think about when we tried all those extreme savoury snacks, there was actually some really fun products in there. And that's a bit that kind of worries me just a little bit, because fundamentally food plays a much, much bigger role than just sustenance. There's potential here for a bit of more of unintended consequences to strike with the abstraction of pleasure in the discussions that we're having, because we aren't talking about the pleasure of food. The risk here is it all folding down one-dimensionally onto weight loss, which obviously is incredibly important. We're talking about some really important drugs that are going to do some amazing things. We really want to keep half an eye on the fact that there is pleasure in food.
So, Fiala, what are the other things we need to be thinking around in terms of nutrition, given that preferences are changing quite rapidly?
Yeah, there are definitely some micronutrient issues there. But also, if the diet is changing and you're starting to go off certain foods, for example, if you think about milk and dairy products, if you go off those, you don't have as many of those. And obviously, the immediate thing that springs to mind is calcium. How are we going to ensure that we don't encounter bone density issues because people aren't having those dairy products with all the calcium in it? So again, it's just back to this whole thought process that this is very complicated and we've got a lot of angles to think about. And it's coming at us very quickly, isn't it, this change?
Now, Paulina, I think we need to zoom out a bit. It's clear that Ozempic is having unintended consequences overall. So many of them are welcome, some are not as welcome. Can we speculate on the potential wider societal impacts here?
Yes, I think in the absence of evidence about the long-term effects of GLP-1 medication, we can and maybe even should turn to behavioral science and consumer psychology to hypothesize about the impact of these drugs. And when we consider impact, we need to remember that semaglutides aren't just changing individual behaviors of people who take them. They're starting to reshape the way we think about weight management collectively as a society, and that's having all kinds of ripple effects. For example, we're starting to see a shift in the way weight management is perceived, moving from something purely lifestyle driven, so changing the way you eat and exercise traditionally, to something that can be medically managed. And this could reduce stigma around seeking medical help for obesity, which is great, but it could also come with a downside, like making lifestyle changes seem redundant. So why exercise if I don't have to? And for some people, these lifestyle spillover effects may happen naturally. So they might start eating more nutritious foods or exercising more regularly, not because they're told to, but because it feels aligned with their progress, with their weight loss. This is also linked to something psychologists call self-concept congruence, where people try to act in ways that match their self-perception. So, for example, someone who loses weight can begin to see themselves as an overall healthier person. So I've lost weight, that means I must be healthier. Therefore, I should do things that align with this identity, like snacking on healthy food, jogging, or maybe even quitting smoking.
And Paulina, I'm interested here in the impacts outside of the person taking GLP-1 drugs. So, for example, imagine out to dinner with friends and one of them is taking the medication, eating substantially less than everyone else.
Let's be honest, we're all afraid of other people judging us. So if a lot of our friends suddenly eat a lot less, we may end up feeling like we're the odd one out if we end up eating more, especially around them, which is another point. There's the behavior in front of others, and then there's the behavior behind the closed doors. So yes, I think it's likely to change the kind of immediate behaviors when you're in the presence of those people. But there's a question of whether it would actually rub off on those people and long term.
Caitlin mentioned earlier in the podcast imagine the shopper of the household going shopping and they're on GLP-1 medication. Is that going to impact not only what they buy for themselves, but for their whole family? I mean, Faris, is there any evidence that you have to suggest that that shopper may be buying less, not just for themselves, but for the whole family?
It's a great question. I don't think we have data to support it yet, but you would think so. So if your primary shopper is somebody who is being treated with a GLP-1 receptor agonist, they are experiencing greater satiety, they are having less cravings for energy-dense foods, they're probably selecting potentially lower energy density, more nutritious foods that are then being brought into the household. And so that could be stimulating a favorable shift in what's eaten within the household that trickles down to other members of the family. If parents are consuming smaller portions, maybe they're serving their children smaller portions. And so there could potentially be a favorable trickle-down effect here. We certainly need data to support this, but we could certainly postulate that that would be the case.
So I'm going to put you all on the spot now. You are the board of a major food and beverage company, and I'm going to ask you for one key initiative. Now, that might be a research initiative, i.e. something to explore, or it might be something to do with a specific innovation. What are you going to offer up to Paris?
I'm a scientist. I'm all about the data. So my answer is going to be in that realm. I think we desperately need more data on what people are choosing to eat and how much they are eating in real world settings. We've got a little bit of data in controlled laboratory settings, and those are important studies for establishing proof of concept, but we just don't know what people are selecting and consuming, how their cravings are, how their diurnal patterns of hunger and fullness are in the real world. And I think having a better understanding and having sort of empirical data can really help inform what we should be doing at the industry level to cater to those shifts.
Okay, tracking consumer habits, capturing data. Fiala, you work extensively with food and beverage manufacturers to improve the experience of their products. What would you start to be talking to the manufacturers about?
Absolutely, the product experience. I say food is not just about sustenance. We don't want to really fold this all down just on weight loss. It has to be about the experience and also about pleasure. I can't imagine a world where I would never eat chocolate again, that pleasure associated with eating it. So I think to take a step back, or maybe even forward, and actually to think about the product experience of people that are on these drugs and how they're interacting with food.
Paulina, number 3.
So I'll maybe offer something different. So I would probably look at how to market products to tap into that change in lifestyle and identity that I talked about. And this would be to help people make choices that are aligned to their weight loss and their hopefully new identity as a healthier person. I think it does happen in some categories at the moment, but I think there would be a huge opportunity to make products more attractive to this particular target audience, as well as make it easier for them to choose products that are aligned with their nutritional needs as well.
Understood.
To your point earlier, Paulina, it's interesting to see how this will continue to potentially dovetail with the beauty industry and other industries and self-care especially, and thinking about how much easier it is to be more positive and outwardly loving when you do love yourself. So the implications that are emotional that are underlying here are certainly something interesting to explore as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but the ramifications for the personal care industry as well. Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you for a very thought-provoking debate, everyone. We really appreciate you having you on our podcast here, and we welcome all contributions from our listeners. You know, we always love to hear from you. So if you'd like to contribute to our discussion or debate, please find us at ImpactMakersPod on Instagram. Feel free to leave a comment, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, well, what's clear is that the whole GLP-1 business is hugely complex, isn't it? There are knowns, but we can be sure that there are also some unknowns. It's a fast-moving story and one that is already impacting the food industry. And for one insider's view, we're going to go to Nikki Clark. Now, she is CEO and founder of Renourish, makers of the world's first microwavable grab-and-go bottle soup with health benefits. I'm going to embarrass you, Nikki, by reminding you that you were also nominated. In fact, you won Innovation Entrepreneur of the Year 2023. We are not worthy, Nikki. Hello, by the way.
Oh, many, many thanks. It's so lovely to be on your show. Brilliant.
Great. Well, it's brilliant to have you. Tell our listeners why you set up Renourish and how's it going?
I set up Renourish in 2018 and it launched in 2019. And my background was critical care nurse, nutritionist, reflexologist. So it has always been food is medicine. I invented this bottle and it's patented. And I basically made soup on the go. So you can heat it in a bottle, it stays warm for 40 minutes and you can drink it out the bottle. But soup has always been so nutrient dense. It's absorbed into the body within 30 minutes. It's packed with fiber, vitamins, protein, but no one had made it in a convenient format until me.
Wow, it's certainly getting a lot of visibility over here in the UK, so maybe sometime soon in the US. Now, we are, of course, covering the whole Ozempic era that seems to lie ahead of us, the GLP-1 medications. What is your reaction to what you understand about this so far?
I think we always joked over the years, gosh, find that magic pill. It is here. You cannot close the door. It is a vast juggernaut now.
See, even if it's just 1 in 10 or even 1 in 20 consumers, when we consider the reductions in calorie intakes for this cohort, that is enough to put a lot of categories into decline. But how do you think it might affect our relationship with food?
When I put my medical hat on and then I put my brand hat on, how we have to take responsibility for our health, but there seems to be a disconnect, I think, with our head and what goes into our bodies. People have to take more responsibility. We are where we are with obesity because of the food chain. Everywhere in the supermarkets is row upon row upon row of ultra-processed, high sugary foods that make us fat. We have lost, I think, our minds really in what is healthy.
One of the possible impacts of the Ozempic era is that we will have an increase in consumers that are seeking nutritionally dense and diverse foods with added protein and fiber in order to ensure that they are not losing vital nutrients because they're simply eating less. This is good news, isn't it?
This is very good news for Renourish because soup is absorbed very quickly. Our soups are very high in fiber. Our soups are high in protein. And we're bringing out a range in beginning of February that is really highlighting the grammage of protein and the grammage of fiber.
There's a lot of headlines surrounding UPF at the moment, ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
Do we think that combined with the onset of Ozempic and the impacts there, that potentially the collision of these two dynamics could create the spark that causes some kind of escalation in the food industry generally towards more nutritious products?
I really hope so. GLP-1 is a powerful tool, but pairing it with a healthy diet is absolutely key in achieving these results, good results and long-term results. We cannot stop this big Wegovy GLP-1 train. If it allows you to pick up more nutritious foods and make better choices, then okay.
There could be a long-term benefit in terms of proper nutrition. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the science at the moment is not showing that, but potentially that is the good outcome here, isn't it?
It is. We are being tagged in an awful lot on our social media now with people that are using us who are on GLP-1. I think, okay, as a brand, we could really highlight these are good for you.
Nikki, really appreciate your frankness. And we wish you luck, particularly with your new products coming out in February 25.
Yes,
I will be looking out for those. I am a fan, I have to confess. Been nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much.
Right. It's Z Factor time, which means Shania from the Together Agency is here. We asked you this time to bring us 3 big market narratives that TikTok is likely to be crusading on in 2025 and may just impact brands' consumer engagement and product development strategies. Are we too demanding for you, Shania?
If you don't ask. Well, actually, this was an interesting exercise because it forced me to zoom out a little. But let's be realistic. In the age of everything, everywhere, all at once, today's offer is just a small corner of the mega maelstrom of content that is out there.
Disclaimer accepted, Shania. What's first?
The first narrative that I see expanding in 2025 is the escapist mindset. I'll let this creator do the talking.
You know, I had this topic on my mind as why do we seek escapism? I think we all seek escapism as a way to take a break from reality and recharge. I think it's good because sometimes we just need to decompress from life and forget about our obligations and responsibilities. So what does escapism mean? Escapism is the tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. This could range from going clubbing, playing video games, or traveling, or anything that you see as a way of escaping your current situation or reality.
Now, clearly this ladders up to the self-care trend that's reaching megatrend status ever since the pandemic. At MMR, we definitely see further opportunities for brands to establish deeper human connections with products, services, and experiences that elicit certain emotions, such as joy or delight. It all comes down to knowing which sensory characteristics deliver upon these emotions, and this is where I spend a lot of my time personally, so what can I say? Reach out if you want to make your brand an oasis for overburdened consumers. What do we have next?
So, our next narrative is less of a mindset and more about how brands are creating experiences for shoppers. There is increasing incidence of fashion or beauty brands tapping into the sensory properties of food to generate a more impulsive dynamic. This post gives us all a taste.
Brands are making you hungry for their products and they're doing it with food. For example, Hailey Bieber's Rhode, Kim Kardashian's Skims, Jacquemus, who are just killing it on socials, and Marc Jacobs with Nara Smith. There's a reason these food crossovers work so well. It's that sensory marketing that makes the product look delicious. You feel like you can almost smell the juicy orange scent here. This is an attention grabber, and the buttery texture of this croissant. I'm obsessed with the creative direction because it just makes the product look yummy. You almost want to take a bite. Using food to promote a fashion brand creates this weird juxtaposition. Because in what normal scenario would you leave a designer bag on a stack of plates, or dip your lip balm into whipped cream, or put a Marc Jacobs bag in the oven? Rhode is using specific foods to convey the vibe, smell, perhaps taste of their products. It gets people building associations with your brand, for example, the glazed donut representing clear and glowing skin. The crossover of food and fashion or beauty creates this feeling of, wow, this is weird, but it kind of works.
Now, we've seen beauty brands tap into food from an ingredient standpoint, but this is above and beyond.
Well, Rhode, the brand mentioned on our last episode, does a really good job at this. You can't buy or try Rhode in a shop, so the TikTok team have unlocked the experience of the products by illustrating sensorial associations with food. In the clip that we just heard, Rhode staged a buttery croissant to promote the sensory appeal of its latest peptide lip tint. And it places the same product with whipped ice cream and freshly frozen raspberries to communicate aspects of the product experience to its audience.
It is a really interesting evolution of multi-sensory marketing, Shania. Will the food industry tap into sensory characteristics of beauty, I wonder?
Well, it feels more likely than it ever has done, Caitlin.
And on to your last narrative for us, Shania.
For some time now, hashtag overconsumption has been gaining momentum as a movement on TikTok. And I use the word movement deliberately, because this is bigger than your average TikTok trend. Essentially, overconsumption is a backlash against excessive consumerism. I would say that it's an extension of the de-influencing trend, which saw creators call out brands that they perceive to be falling short in certain respects, say sustainability. And I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this. Here's one creator making it absolutely clear.
Overconsumption has gotten so out of hand that people are making videos with so many shower products. Do you really need 5 different scents of the same product? Like, if I want to try a new scent, I just wait until I'm done with one and then I get another one that's a different scent. There's no way that she is going to use all of these products. The worst part about this is that I was expecting people were going to be mad in the comments about this level of overconsumption, but everyone was just lapping it up. Videos like this on TikTok are just normalizing this amount of consumption and making it even aspirational. This is becoming a goal for people with disposable income, to have all of these products that they're not even going to use and will just end up in the landfill. If you want to see more de-influencing and sustainability content, follow us.
What do you think is behind this movement, Shania?
You know what? I think that for many Gen Z, the prospect of home ownership and a curated lifestyle is a pipe dream. So when you're struggling to afford the rent, it's easy to become resentful of those who repeatedly parade the latest stuff. Those that do have it all are becoming unrelatable.
So are we seeing the start of hashtag TikTok made me not buy it?
I believe that we are. There is a suggestion that brands move to a different profit model, where only 40% of spending is on products, with 30% on experiences like rentals or digital goods, and another 30% on maintenance and upcycling. For brands in the 5-year planning cycle, it may be time to examine ways to reduce reliance on physical sales.
And this is something we're going to pick up on a special webcast called the 2025 Show for MMR Research. Listeners can go to mmr-research.com to register for that. Thank you, Shania. We will check in with these predictions later in the year.
Whoa, what an episode, Caitlin.
You're not wrong, Andrew, and a very salient one we needed to make. We're only at the beginning of this Ozempic era, but it's already clear that it's going to have a marked impact on people's behavior in all manner of ways.
You know what, I think it adds weight to the suggestion that for many markets, many categories, we may be reaching that point of peak consumption.
Yes, and Shania's call out of overconsumption only compounds that idea.
So I think these trends are going to strengthen the case for manufacturers investing in strategies that prioritize product superiority to protect market share. You know, if consumption is stagnant, it's about market share, isn't it? And also strategies that generate additional premium tiers to protect profits.
Growth is getting harder for sure, but we do know that brands are, for now at least, returning to volume growth. So we'll be back in our Impact Makers studio in a few weeks' time to bring you an episode you may be able to smell coming, all about aroma. We'll have industry guests and sensory specialists by our side to guide us all into a more fragrant future.
There is so much going on in fragrance, Caitlin. I mean, total body deodorants, hair perfume. I think we may have to open the windows for that one.
So have your noses at the ready. And remember, if you're enjoying listening to our podcast, to give us a high rating, subscribe, and recommend us to your friends. Maybe even make it your New Year's resolution. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Goodbye. Subscribe.
Like and subscribe.